There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, but only one way to live without fear: to surrender yourself utterly to faith. The shrine world of Ophelia 7 basks beneath the glare of its holy suns, its surface dominated by cathedrals, reliquaries, and fortress convents. Here no child laughs without a prayer, no bell tolls without ritual. The planet is a monument of stone and fire, consecrated by the blood of martyrs and the endless vigilance of the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. Every dawn begins the same. Rows of armored women kneel in the cathedral's great hall, the light of stained glass bleeding crimson and gold across their ceramite. Incense thickens the air until lungs burn, a reminder that breath itself is owed to the emperor. Their voices rise as one, chanting hymns that reverberate through pillars carved from mountains older than humanity's imperium. For them, prayer is not separate from war. Prayer is war, sharpened into the purity of purpose. The Sororitas are not like the common soldiery of the Astra Militarum. They do not fear. They do not doubt. To them, every lasburn, every scar from bolter recoil, every night spent kneeling on cold stone floors is a sacrament. To bleed is to worship. To kill is to exalt. To die is to triumph. Among them walks Canoness Viridia, clad in gilded armor etched with scripture. Her gaze pierces like the edge of a power blade, unyielding, merciless, even in compassion. She is both commander and confessor, demanding perfection not from cruelty, but from the understanding that hesitation is heresy when souls are at stake. Still with us in the darkness? If this tale chills your soul, strike the like button and let the Emperor know you stand with his warriors. Subscribe if you crave more Grimdark legends. His light endures through your faith. On Ophelia 7, the Sisters of Battle ready themselves. Somewhere in the galaxy, heresy festers. And when the call comes, they will answer, not with mercy, but with fire.
The Adepta Sororitas did not spring from nothing. Their origin is as steeped in blood and betrayal as the Imperium itself. To understand the Sisters of Battle is to revisit the age of apostasy, when the ecclesiarchy, the church that claims to be the Emperor's voice, drowned itself in corruption. Once they were not warriors, but innocents. The Daughters of the Emperor, they were called, a religious order living in strict isolation on a distant world. They devoted their lives to purity of spirit, bound to vows of obedience, chastity, and service. It might have remained so, had fate not dragged them into the path of Gouge Van Dyer, the High Lord whose madness nearly destroyed the Imperium. Van Dyer saw not daughters of devotion, but a tool. With his honeyed lies and demonstrations of power, he bound them to his cause, arming them as his personal bodyguard, the brides of the Emperor. It was a name heavy with blasphemy, for they served not the Emperor's light, but Van Dyer's tyranny. These warrior women enforced his decrees, slaughtering thousands in his name, until at last the scales of fate tipped. The legend tells of the Custodian Guard, those golden warriors who served none but the Emperor directly. When the Custodes revealed to the brides that Van Dyer's power was a sham, that his word was not divine but poisoned with arrogance, they brought them before the golden throne itself. There the brides saw truth with their own eyes. The Emperor did not speak through Van Dyer. They cast off his yoke, and with their defection, his reign collapsed. Out of this crucible, Sebastian Thor, newly risen ecclesiarch, decreed that no men under arms could serve the ecclesiarchy, but women were another matter. Thus, the brides were reforged as the Adepta Sororitas, the military arm of the church, sanctioned guardians of the faith. No longer enslaved by false prophets, they became the sword and flame of the true emperor. Centuries have passed since then, but the stain of that origin never leaves their prayers. Every litany, every shot fired, every martyrdom is both an offering and a penance, a refusal to ever again be deceived. Their zeal burns not from fanatic blindness, but from the terror of repeating the past. And so, in the present, each sister carries that legacy in her armor, her hymns, her heart. They are not Astartes, those genetically altered titans of war. They are mortal, yet unyielding. Their strength is not gene-forged, but soul-forged, and their conviction cuts deeper than adamantium. On Ophelia 7, Canoness Viridia reminds her warriors of this history as she drills them. Between hymns, she tells them of Vandir, of Thor, of the custodes who opened their eyes. For in every campaign, whether against Xenos or heretic, the true enemy is always the same: deception, corruption, the whisper of falsehoods in the dark. The ecclesiarchy prays, the sororitas act. Where priests falter in words, the sisters make truth known in fire. And even space marines in their fortress monasteries speak with respect of these mortal women whose will is unbreakable. For in the Imperium there are many ways to serve, but only one way to endure, through faith that does not waver. On the parade grounds of the convent sanctorum, the morning drills resound like a war hymn. Rows of armored women move in flawless unison, each bolter angled precisely, each step thunderous on the marble floor. The air quivers with hymns, half sung and half shouted, as the sisters remind themselves that every breath, every bullet, every heartbeat belongs to the God Emperor. Their strength does not come from gene seed or arcane surgery. No chemical enhancement fuels their endurance. Instead, they are shaped through unrelenting discipline. From the moment they are taken as orphans into the Schola Progenium, their lives are stripped of softness. They are taught that hesitation is sin, that mercy is weakness, and that to doubt the emperor even in thought is to betray humanity itself. Weapons are their catechisms. The bolter, its recoil capable of breaking a mortal wrist, is an extension of their faith. The bark of its rounds like hymns of vengeance. The flamer is their answer to heresy's contagion, fire cleansing what cannot be reasoned with. The melter reduces false idols to slag, symbols of corruption to vapor. Every weapon bears scripture etched into its casing, every suit of power armor inscribed with litanies of protection. Their very tools are reliquaries, sanctified before battle, kissed with prayers as others might bless rosaries. Canoness Viridia oversees the drills with eyes that miss nothing. When one sister hesitates a fraction of a second in reloading, Viridia's voice cuts sharper than a power sword. Would you pause while demons claw at your throat? Would you falter when souls cry out for salvation? The warrior corrects herself instantly, sweat dripping into her eyes, but her chant never falters. For the Emperor I endure, for the Emperor I burn.
Competence is not optional among the Sororitas. It is survival. Their skill at arms rivals that of the Astartes, not because of physical might, but because of absolute fanatical precision. A sister's discipline is her shield. Her aim, guided by unwavering faith, becomes divine judgment. Yet for all their armament, the greatest weapon the Sororitas wield is invisible. It is faith itself, the conviction that can ignite miracles. Some whisper of bolter rounds striking with impossible accuracy, of flames that burn hotter than promethium allows, of wounds closing where no medicine was applied. The Mechanicus scoffs, calling it chance. The Inquisition calls it sanctioned anomaly. But the sisters know the truth. The Emperor answers, and he answers through them. Today's training ends with fire. Rows of targets erupt in flame as squads advance in seamless coordination, hymns rising louder than the crack of gunfire. To an outsider, it would seem madness, women in armor chanting as they march into infernos of their own making, but to them this is worship in its purest form. When the drills end, Viridia addresses her warriors. Her voice carries the weight of scripture. Your weapons are holy, your bodies are temples, but it is your faith that makes you invincible. Remember this, the Space Marines are the Emperor's sword. We are his fire. And fire does not break, it consumes. The sisters bow their heads, murmuring in unison, for the Emperor always. In that moment, the ground shakes ever so slightly beneath their feet. A tremor, subtle, fleeting. Some ignore it. Viridia does not. Her gaze narrows, for she knows faith alone does not cause the earth to stir. Something else approaches. Something that will soon test whether their weapons, their discipline, and their devotion are enough.
The tremor was only the beginning. Hours later, while the convent still resounded with hymns, a different voice cut through the sacred rhythm, the crackling, broken cry of a distress vox. The transmission came from a distant agri-world on the edge of Imperial reach, Crypsis Prime, a planet known more for its wheat harvests and cathedral spires than for war. Its people had always been loyal, their tithes steady, their pilgrimages constant. Yet now the vox wailed with desperation, words drowned in static. Cathedral, flames, the faithful, silence. Emperor, help us! Then nothing but white noise. Canoness Viridia listened in silence, her jaw tight beneath her helm. She knew the weight of such calls. The Imperium is vast, its bureaucracy ponderous, its army stretched thin. Often cries like this vanish into the void, unanswered, but not when the sisters of battle hear them. For the Sororitas, heresy and corruption are diseases that must be cut out before they spread. She summoned her command staff, Palatine Althea, Sister Superior Cassia, and Confessor Morn, a firebrand priest whose sermons could stir soldiers to fight bare-handed. They gathered in the war chapel, where the flickering light of candles played across stained glass depictions of martyrdoms long past. The vox cut mid-prayer, Viridia said, voice low but heavy. Not war, but desecration. If the Emperor's name is silenced, then his enemies are already at work. Confessor Morn slammed his Crozius into the floor, sparks dancing from its head. Then let us strike before rot takes root. Delay is the ally of heresy. Althea's expression was colder, calculated.
The guard could be summoned, Astartes perhaps, if the threat proves dire. Viridia shook her head. The guard will take months to muster. The Astartes have wars enough of their own. The Emperor has placed this burden upon us. We will bear it. Preparations began at once. The Seraphim squads checked their jump packs with ritual precision, offering prayers to the machine spirit within each engine. The retributors loaded heavy bolters, their voices rising in hymns timed to the rattle of chains as ammunition belts were blessed. Exorcist tanks rumbled in their hangars, organ pipes gleaming with sacred oils, waiting to sing death across the battlefield. As the strike force gathered, Confessor Morn's voice thundered through the halls. The fields of Crypsis Prime shall burn with holy flame. Heresy shall be cut down root and branch. Sing, daughters of the Emperor, for tonight we carry his fire. The sisters responded in unison, a roar that shook the cathedral walls. For the Emperor, for his glory, for his wrath. Ophelia's seven skies trembled as gunships lifted from the convent spires, engines keening like choirs in lament. The sacred fleet formed above the planet, transports, strike craft, and warships, all bearing the litanies of battle. Canoness Viridia stood at the prow of her flagship, rosary beads wound tight in her gauntlet, her gaze locked on the stars ahead. Space Marines fight for duty, the Astra Militarum fights for survival, but the Adepta Sororitas, they fight for faith. And faith demands they answer this call, whatever it reveals. Still with us in the fire? Subscribe now to follow the sisters deeper into the heart of heresy, and comment below, what corruption do you think lurks on Crypsis Prime?
The journey through the void was silent, save for the creak of hull plating and the whisper of prayers echoing through the ships. Within their transports, the Adepta Sororitas prepared not with idle chatter, but with hymns, each sister polishing her weapons as though they were relics of saints. In truth, they were. Every bolter bore fragments of scripture. Every blade had been dipped in sacred oils. Even the fuel within their flamers was considered holy, a gift of fire, consecrated to purge unbelief. Canoness Viridia stood in the command sanctum of the flagship Sanctity of Fire, her armor gleaming with etched passages from the Lictitio Divinitatis. She was not a woman prone to hesitation, yet even she could not ignore the silence of Crypsis Prime. A loyal agri-world does not simply vanish from the Emperor's light. Something had twisted it, something cunning. The fleet made orbit. What should have been a thriving jewel of grain fields and cathedral towns was now shrouded in ash. Fires burned unchecked across its continents, and the planetary voxnet was dead. Auspex readings showed no open battlefields, no massive war engines, only cities gone still, cathedrals gutted by fire, and strange energy spikes that pulsed in irregular rhythms. Virilia's voice rang across the vox channels, steady and unyielding. Sisters of battle, prepare to descend. Our Emperor calls us to judgment. The dropships broke through the atmosphere, their hulls glowing as they tore into the world's skies. Through viewport slits, the sisters glimpsed what awaited them. Once golden spires, now blackened and broken, wheat fields reduced to dust, processions of corpses nailed to walls in mockery of crucifixion. The scent of smoke and decay bled into the cabins ruins even before they landed. The strike force touched down at the ruins of Sanctus Gloria Cathedral, once the heart of the planet's worship. Its proud spires had collapsed inward, leaving only jagged bones of stone pointing skyward. Charred icons lay shattered across the square, their faces defaced with crude carvings, twisting symbols that seared the eye, half hidden but unmistakable. Heretics had been here. Worse, heretics who worshipped something else. The sisters deployed with ritual precision. Seraphim leapt skyward on roaring jump packs, fanning out to secure vantage points. Retributors hauled their heavy weapons into the rubble, barrels trained on shadowed archways. Rank upon rank of battle sisters advanced with bolters ready, hymns cutting through the oppressive silence. Confessor Morn strode at their center, Crozius raised high, his voice unshaken. Fear not, children of the Emperor. This world may have fallen, but tonight it shall rise again in his fire. A sound carried on the wind then, not the crack of battle, but something worse. Chanting, low, guttural, discordant, it slithered from the ruined cathedral's depths. The sisters froze as one, weapons raised. Canoness Viridia lifted her power sword, its edge humming with consecrated energy. Forward! If there are voices, there are souls. If they are unclean, we shall burn them clean. Step by step, the Sisters of Battle advanced into the ashes, their hymns growing louder, clashing against the heretical chorus like steel upon steel. In the heart of ruin, faith and blasphemy were about to meet, and only one would leave the cathedral standing.
The air inside the cathedral ruins was heavy with soot and the coppery tang of blood. Once, Sanctus Gloria had been a place of radiant beauty, its vaulted ceilings alive with mosaics of saints, its altars polished by the hands of pilgrims. Now, every surface was scarred. The mosaics had been defaced with jagged scratches forming symbols not meant for mortal eyes, and the altars were blackened with charred bone. The sisters advanced cautiously, their hymns echoing like a challenge in the cavernous ruin. Each bootstep crunched over broken glass and scorched parchment. A sister paused to lift a burned scrap of scripture. The words had been smeared with a dark, tarry substance that smelled of rot. She whispered a prayer and tucked it into her armor, a promise to preserve even the smallest fragment of sanctity. Suddenly, the silence shattered. Bolter fire roared from the shadows, tracer rounds sparking against marble pillars. A sororitas in the vanguard collapsed, her chest plate punched through. Yet as she fell, her lips still moved in prayer, the rosary clutched in her gauntlet unbroken. "Contact!" barked Sister Superior Cassia. "Purge the shadows!" Flamers roared to life, golden gouts of holy fire pouring into alcoves and shattered pews. Screams followed, not of soldiers, but of civilians twisted into heretics. Ragged figures stumbled out, their skin etched with crude runes, their eyes glazed with fanatic devotion. Some wore fragments of priestly robes, others tattered pilgrim's garb, all wielding makeshift weapons consecrated to things that had no name in imperial creed. Canoness Viridia strode forward, her power sword blazing with light as it cleaved through a charging cultist. "Hymns!" she commanded. "Drown their lies in truth!"
The cathedral thundered with the Sororitas' voices. The litany of fire rose above the clash of combat. Verses chanted in time with bolter bursts. Heretics fell in waves, their blood mingling with the ash of toppled saints. Yet still they came, shrieking oaths to their dark patrons. On the upper balconies, seraphim ignited their jump packs, soaring through the smoke. The pistols spat bolts of explosive light, each shot tearing heretics apart amid scream. From the rear, retributors laid down withering streams of heavy bolter fire, cutting down swarms before they reached the main line. The sisters fought not as mortals, but as a choir of steel, every motion precise, every act of violence an act of devotion. And still, for every heretic slain, another emerged from the ruins deeper within. Confessor Morn's voice carried above the slaughter. See how they profane his house. Hear how they mock his light. Let their screams be our hymn of victory. Burn the sin from their flesh and let no shadow linger. The battle raged until smoke obscured the very rafters. Then, as the last cultist was cut down, an eerie stillness returned. The sisters stood among heaps of corpses, their armor blackened with soot, their lenses glowing faintly in the gloom. But Viridia's instincts prickled. Heresy this organized, this entrenched, did not begin with common pilgrims turning on their faith. Something deeper festered, something guiding. And from below the cathedral, faint but unmistakable, the chanting continued.
The echoes rose from the catacombs beneath Sanctus Gloria, a guttural litany that pulsed like a heartbeat through the broken stone. The sisters knew the sound instantly. Heresy does not whisper, it summons. Canoness Viridia gestured forward, her voice sharp and steady. To the depths, the Emperor's light must burn where shadows dare linger. The great stairwell spiraled down into darkness, its walls smeared with handprints of ash and dried blood. Every torch had been snuffed out, leaving the descent lit only by the glow of helmet optics and the dim flicker of holy seals etched onto power armor. The further they went, the stronger the stench became. Incense turned foul, mixed with rot and iron tang of sacrificial blood. At the bottom, the sisters entered the crypts of the saints. Sarcophagi that should have housed relics of the faithful had been pried open, their bones desecrated and arranged in grotesque displays. One skull had been painted crimson and set upon an altar, its empty sockets glowing faintly with unnatural light. Another coffin had been inverted, its occupant nailed to the ceiling like some obscene parody of martyrdom. Sister Superior Cassia spat a curse. They profane even the bones of the blessed. Viridia's knuckles tightened around her rosary. Then we shall cleanse them with fire and with faith. From the far end of the crypt, figures emerged, dozens of them, ragged and gaunt, their skin carved with spiraling runes that oozed with fresh blood. Their chants rose louder, words twisted into praises of the dark gods. Their weapons were crude, chains, axes, shards of shattered icons reforged into blades, yet the light in their eyes was fanatic, unbreakable. Bolters thundered, heretics fell, torn apart in sprays of gore, but they advanced even as bodies crumpled. A cultist flung himself bodily onto a sister's flamer, dragging her to the ground, clawing until Cassia's bolt pistol blew his head apart at point-blank range. The hymn of the Sororitas grew louder in defiance, their voices cutting through the madness. By his light we endure, by his wrath we cleanse. But even as the heretics were slain, the chanting behind them grew louder still. In the shadows of the deepest crypt, a massive door of black stone pulsed with unnatural light. Symbols writhed across its surface, glowing faintly as if alive, and from behind it came the echo of countless voices, far more than the cultists could account for. Viridia lifted her sword, its edge blazing. This is no simple heresy. Something greater stirs. The faithful of this world did not fall alone. They were led. As the sisters reloaded, smoke curling from their weapons, the door trembled, once, then twice, and a crack of blinding light split across its surface. The heretics around it fell to their knees, screaming praises in tongues not meant for human throats. And in that moment, the Sisters of Battle knew. They were not merely fighting lost souls. They were standing at the threshold of damnation itself.
The journey through the void was silent, save for the creak of hull plating and the whisper of prayers echoing through the ships. Within their transports, the Adepta Sororitas prepared not with idle chatter, but with hymns, each sister polishing her weapons as though they were relics of saints. In truth, they were. Every bolter bore fragments of scripture. Every blade had been dipped in sacred oils. Even the fuel within their flamers was considered holy, a gift of fire consecrated to purge unbelief. Canoness Viridia stood in the command sanctum of the flagship Sanctity of Fire, her armor gleaming with etched passages from the Lectitio Divinitatis. She was not a woman prone to hesitation, yet even she could not ignore the silence of Crypsis Prime. A loyal agri-world does not simply vanish from the Emperor's light. Something had twisted it. Something cunning. The fleet made orbit. What should have been a thriving jewel of grain fields and cathedral towns was now shrouded in ash. Fires burned unchecked across its continents, and the planetary voxnet was dead. Auspec's readings showed no open battlefields, no massive war engines, only cities gone still, cathedrals gutted by fire, and strange energy spikes that pulsed in irregular rhythms. Viridia's voice rang across the vox channels, steady and unyielding. "Sisters of battle, prepare to descend. Our Emperor calls us to judgment." The dropships broke through the atmosphere, their hulls glowing as they tore into the world's skies. Through viewport slits, the sisters glimpsed what awaited them. Once golden spires, now blackened and broken. Wheat fields reduced to dust. Processions of corpses nailed to walls in mockery of crucifixion. The scent of smoke and decay bled into the cabins even before they landed. The strike force touched down at the ruins of Sanctus Gloria, cathedral once the heart of the planet's worship. Its proud spires had collapsed inward, leaving only jagged bones of stone pointing skyward. Charred icons lay shattered across the square, their faces defaced with crude carvings, twisting symbols that seared the eye, half hidden but unmistakable. Heretics had been here. Worse, heretics who worshipped something else.
The sisters deployed with ritual precision. Seraphim leapt skyward on roaring jump packs, fanning out to secure vantage points. Retributors hauled their heavy weapons into the rubble, barrels trained on shadowed archways. Rank upon rank of battle sisters advanced with bolters ready, hymns cutting through the oppressive silence. Confessor Morn strode at their center, Crozius raised high, his voice unshaken. Fear not, children of the Emperor. This world may have fallen, but tonight it shall rise again in his fire. A sound carried on the wind then, not the crack of battle, but something worse. Chanting. Low, guttural, discordant, it slithered from the ruined cathedral's depths. The sisters froze as one, weapons raised. Canoness Viridia lifted her power sword, its edge humming with consecrated energy. Forward, if there are voices, there are souls. If they are unclean, we shall burn them clean. Step by step, the sisters of battle advanced into the ashes, their hymns growing louder, clashing against the heretical chorus like steel upon steel. In the heart of ruin, faith and blasphemy were about to meet, and only one would leave the cathedral standing.
The black stone chamber yawned open, and for the first time the sisters saw what had been hidden behind the heretic's zealotry. The room beyond was not a tomb, it was a womb, carved into obscene mockery of a cathedral. Where once statues of saints might have stood, there loomed colossal effigies made of fused flesh and bone, their mouths frozen in eternal screams. Warp light spilled from fissures in the walls, warping stone into pulsing, vein-ridden growths. At the chamber's center stood an altar hewn from the shattered relics of the faithful. Gold chalices, once vessels of communion, had been melted into a throne of jagged metal. Upon it sat not a man, but a thing, a figure swollen with corruption, its body a patchwork of muscle, steel, and blasphemous gifts. Its face still bore the faint outline of the priest it once had been, but horns sprouted from its brow, and its tongue lashed like a serpent as it roared. "Behold the prophet of the veil," the cultists screamed, tearing their flesh in worship, "chosen of the dark gods, herald of their coming." The sisters advanced as one, bolters raised, voices unbroken. "No prophet but him on Terra, no god but the Emperor eternal." The monstrosity rose, towering above them, its massive frame cracking the throne beneath its weight. In one hand, it carried a flail of spiked chains, dripping with blood that hissed where it struck the stone. With the other, it gestured, and the air itself shivered. Warp fire erupted in coils of purple and green, striking the nearest sister full in the chest. Her armor blackened, her body crumpled, but her lips still moved in prayer even as she burned away. Canoness Viridia charged, her sword blazing with holy light. She struck against the flail, sparks exploding as faith met corruption. The prophet bellowed, swinging wide, smashing relics, coffins, and flesh alike in his fury. The sisters closed ranks. Flamers roared, engulfing the prophet in a storm of fire, yet he walked through it laughing, his voice a hideous blend of man and demon. His chains lashed out, wrapping around a sister and dragging her screaming into his maw. Her blood sprayed across the altar as he devoured her whole, his body swelling further with each bite. But even in that nightmare, the Sororitas did not falter. They sang.
Their hymn thundered through the chamber, drowning out the howls of heretics and the shrieks of daemons clawing at the edges of reality. Emperor, guide our hand. Emperor, take our lives if they be thy weapon. One sister fell, her lungs pierced by shrapnel. She used her final breath to ignite her promethium tank, immolating a tide of cultists. Another, crushed beneath the prophet's foot, detonated a grenade as her last act, blowing herself apart with her foe's leg. Martyrdom became their strength. Sacrifice became their blade. And still the prophet pressed forward, unstoppable, his flail crashing down again and again. The chamber shook with every impact. The black stone door cracked wider behind him, and from within came a deeper, more terrible roar, as if the true master of this heresy had yet to step forth. Canoness Viridia, blood running down her face, lifted her sword once more. "Sisters," she cried, "this is the moment. Faith does not ask for survival. Faith asks for victory, whatever the cost." And with that, the Sororitas hurled themselves into the maw of damnation, their voices rising in a single cry of war and prayer.
The battle became a hymn of violence, each note struck in bolter fire and the clash of ceramite against warped flesh. The prophet of the veil swung his chain flail in a murderous arc, sending shards of bone and armor flying with each impact. Sisters were thrown back like rag dolls, their blood slicking the cracked stones, yet not one broke rank. Viridia moved at the forefront, her power sword glowing brighter with each prayer she spat between parries. She fought like a conduit of holy wrath, each strike precise, each defense born from decades of ceaseless war. Her blade bit into the prophet's thigh, carving through muscle swollen by corruption. He roared, a sound that shook the chamber, but the canoness did not yield. "Martyrdom is victory," she cried, driving her sword deeper. The sisters pressed their assault. Retributors braced heavy bolters against ruined pews, their rounds hammering the prophet's torso, tearing chunks of warped flesh from his chest. Dominions encircled him with flamers, wreathing his body in white-hot promethium that burned even his unnatural sinew. And always the hymns continued, louder, fiercer, drowning out the screeches of the cult. But the prophet was no mere mortal touched by chaos. He raised his free hand and uttered words not meant for human throats. The air split, reality tore like fabric, and a rent to the immaterium opened wide at the altar's base. From it clawed daemonettes, lithe and terrible, their talons glistening with venom, their laughter ringing like bells of madness. The sisters did not falter. Blades of the Emperor, strike true! A Celestian squad formed a wedge, storming into the swarm. Chainswords revved, hacking through demonic limbs as bolter rounds tore shrieking creatures into nothingness. One sister, impaled on a daemonette's claw, drove her rosarius into its chest, releasing a burst of holy energy that incinerated them both. Competence and faith guided every movement. Even as their numbers thinned, the Sororitas fought with the certainty of purpose that only the Emperor could bestow. Then the prophet roared again, dragging his flail across the altar. The relics fused into it flared with warp energy, and the room plunged into darkness, save for the sickly green glow of the rent behind him. His voice thundered.
Your emperor is blind, your faith a chain. I am the voice of freedom. Behold the God that answers. From the tear in reality, something vast stirred. A claw the size of a cathedral door scraped against the edges of the portal, seeking entry. The chamber quaked as stones splintered and holy relics shattered. Whatever was coming would dwarf even the monstrosity they fought now. Canoness Viridia's vox crackled, her voice grim but unwavering. Hold the line. This chamber is the wound. Here we either staunch the flow or drown the galaxy in filth. She surged forward, leaping onto the prophet's chest, driving her sword into his throat with all the strength of her faith. Warp ichor sprayed across her armor as she screamed litanies into his face. The prophet staggered. For the first time, his laughter faltered. He choked, clawing at the blade lodged in his neck, his chains thrashing wildly and crushing cultists indiscriminately. The sisters saw the opening. Their hymn became a roar, and they pressed in from all sides, determined to end the abomination before the greater horror behind him broke through. Still with us in the darkness? The tension only rises. Subscribe to stand with the faithful as the war against heresy deepens. Comment your theories below. Can the sisters truly close the warp's maw, or is sacrifice their only destiny?
The chamber was chaos incarnate. The prophet of the veil staggered, Viridia's power sword still buried in his throat, warp ichor steaming as it poured down his chest. His chains lashed out blindly, smashing statues, cultists, even demonettes that strayed too close. The air grew hotter, suffused with the stink of brimstone and blood, as the rift at the altar's base widened further. From that wound in reality, the claw withdrew, but only to be replaced by something far worse. A single eye opened in the rent, burning with violet fire, staring directly into the souls of the living. The sisters faltered for half a breath as the weight of its gaze pressed down upon them like a mountain. Doubt, despair, temptation, every weakness magnified and whispered in their ears. Yet the hymn did not break. One sister, kneeling on shattered stone with both legs mangled, raised her voice above all others. Her hymn rose pure, unwavering, and one by one her sisters redoubled their song. The psychic pressure of the eye recoiled, as though the emperor himself had pressed a gauntleted hand between his daughters in the abyss. Viridia ripped her blade free in a spray of warp light, her teeth bared in a snarl. This ends now. With a signal, the sisters executed a plan forged not in desperation, but in drilled professional precision. Retributors shifted their heavy bolters in unison, triangulating on the prophet's kneecaps. A volley of explosive rounds shattered the joints, dropping him to the floor. Seraphim ignited their jump packs, soaring overhead in coordinated arcs, unleashing volleys of bolt pistols that chewed into his skull. The prophet fell back against the altar, writhing, chains snapping against the floor like thunder. He was no longer laughing. His voice gurgled as his form destabilized, the warp gifts unraveling under the relentless storm of fire and prayer. Then came the gambit. Dominions surged forward, each carrying melta-charges blessed in holy oils. They hurled them at the prophet's chest and the base of the altar. The blasts erupted in concussive fury, fire consuming the monstrosity's torso. The shockwave threw cultists into the walls, splattering them like insects. But the prophet did not die quietly. He screamed one last curse, reaching out to the widening rift, pouring every ounce of his remaining essence into it. The eye flared, brighter and more terrible than before.
and the ceiling of the chamber cracked as warp energy surged upward. Viridia raised her sword high, voice raw with command. With me, every voice, every soul, deny the heretic, deny the warp, deny the false. The sisters answered with a single deafening cry, only the Emperor. The rift shuddered, the eye blinked, its gaze faltering as though blinded by their unity. Warp light dimmed to embers. And in that moment, Viridia leapt, plunging her blade through the prophet's skull, driving it deep into the stone beneath. The monster convulsed once, twice, then collapsed, his body unraveling into ash and smoke, sucked screaming into the closing rift. For a breath, silence reigned. The black stone chamber was cracked, smoking, littered with bodies and relics. Sisters lay still among the dead, their armor scorched, their hands frozen around bolters or clasped in prayer. The rent in reality flickered, narrowing but not yet sealed. Something vast still stirred beyond, clawing for release. The true battle had not yet ended.
The death of the prophet should have been triumph, yet instead it revealed the true scale of the blasphemy. The rent in the altar wall pulsed wider, dragging heat and madness into the chamber. The great eye that had blinked now split apart into many, each one staring in a different direction, weeping streams of warp light that scorched stone and flesh alike. The surviving cultists fell to their knees, clawing at their faces, their chants rising in ecstasy. He comes, the chosen, tear the veil wide. Canoness Viridia wrenched her blade free of the prophet's skull. She staggered only a moment, blood seeping through cracked armor, then raised her voice with iron steadiness. Sisters, form the shield wall. The foe is not yet undone. At her command, the Celestians advanced, interlocking their shields and bracing their armor against the swirling winds. Behind them, retributors reloaded, their bolters clicking into readiness. Seraphim swooped overhead, forming a circling halo of flame. Every motion was precise, honed, an act of faith no less holy than prayer. But the warp does not yield so easily. From the rift burst shards of flesh and bone, creatures half-formed and screaming, writhing in constant transformation. Demons tumbled forth, their bodies melting and reforming as claws, wings or talons with every step. They surged against the sisters' line in a tide of shrieking flesh. The shield wall held. The first wave broke against it, claws screeching across ceramite as bolters answered in thunderous bursts. A Celestian drove her power maul into a demon's skull, cracking it open before stamping it back into the abyss. Another pierced through the gut, dragged the demon closer and detonated her own frag grenade, blasting both into gore. Above, Seraphim unleashed gouts of promethium, their jets igniting whole packs of demons into writhing fireballs. Their voices carried hymns through the choking smoke, each word a weapon more potent than flame. Yet the rift widened still. The eye multiplied again, dozens now, staring in every direction, each one whispering temptations directly into mortal minds. Rest, you have fought enough. Cast down your weapons, and I will cradle you. For an instant, doubt clawed at the sisters' hearts. One stumbled, faltering in her chant, the gaze of an eye fixed on her, promising release. Her bolter lowered. A gauntleted hand struck her helm. Viridia herself. The canoness slammed her sister back into line, her own voice rising in furious defiance. No temptation, no mercy. Faith is the only shield. The faltering sister recovered, raising her weapon again, chanting louder than before. Competence under fire, no hesitation. Their training, their faith, their unity held them against the psychic storm. Still, the chamber shook with every second. The ceiling cracked wider, dust raining down. If the rift was not sealed soon, the whole fortress cathedral might collapse, or worse, become the mouth of a permanent warp breach. Viridia knew what had to be done. We cannot merely endure, we must strike. She lifted her sword toward the wound in reality itself. Into the rift, sisters! With flame and steel, we cut out the infection at its heart. Gasps answered her, but none hesitated. The line shifted, advancing step by step toward the howling abyss. Bolters spat fury, flamers belched fire, and armored boots rang like cathedral bells on the stone floor. Still with us, faithful listener. The veil grows thinner, the peril greater. Strike the like button if you believe faith can burn away corruption, and tell us in the comments, what price would you pay to hold the Emperor's light against the warp?
The rift gaped wider as the sisters advanced, the chamber now more a wound than a room. Reality frayed like torn parchment, and from its edges poured waves of shrieking things, clawed wretches, winged horrors, eyeless spawn that slithered across the stones with jaws where their stomachs should be. Each was annihilation given form, yet the Sororitas pressed forward, shields interlocked, bolters spitting holy thunder. Their hymn rose over the chaos, ragged but unbroken. By his hand are we guided, by his will do we strike. Retributors crouched behind the shield wall, unleashing disciplined volleys, every shell finding its mark, blasting demon after demon into warp mist. Above, seraphims soared, twin pistols flaring in crossfire patterns that cut swaths through the horde. Each movement was precise, coordinated, competence elevated to the level of ritual. At the forefront strode Viridia, her power sword glowing so bright it burned shadows into the walls. She cut through horrors with every swing, her voice a clarion over the din. Onward, the Emperor has no use for cowards. Then the rift screamed. The many eyes blinked shut all at once. From their sockets spilled liquid fire, cascading into the chamber like molten rain. Stone hissed, armor warped, and flesh blistered on contact. Two sisters fell shrieking, their voices breaking from hymn into agony. Yet even then they dragged themselves forward, crawling on ruined legs to fire their last bolts into the tide before falling still. From the wound stepped a greater horror. It was vast, towering nearly to the chamber's broken ceiling. Its body was fluid, a shifting tapestry of limbs, mouths, and claws. Faces flickered across its hide, some human, some demon, some the twisted visages of the very cultists the sisters had slain. It laughed with them all at once, a sound that made blood weep from mortal ears. A lord of change, Viridia breathed, her voice taut with recognition. A greater demon of Tinch, architect of fate, devourer of faith, this was no accident of heresy. The prophet's ritual had always been designed to birth this monstrosity. The sisters did not falter. Instead, their chant grew louder.
One Retributor squad locked their weapons into place, bracing as if anchoring themselves against the immensity of the foe. The first volley struck the demon square in its chest, blasting chunks of shifting flesh into ash. But the wounds closed as quickly as they were made, the creature body reforming into new horrors with every breath. Faith alone will not suffice, Viridia roared over the storm. Faith must become fire. Dominions advanced with melted charges primed. They hurled the blessed bombs beneath the demon's shifting legs, detonating with concussive blasts that sent warp flesh splattering in all directions. The beast staggered, but then shrieked in fury, its beak-like mouth unfurling from its chest to spit a torrent of warp flame. The blast engulfed three sisters, their armor melted, their bones liquefied. Yet as they died, their voices still joined the hymn, unbroken until silence claimed them. The demon laughed again. Every sacrifice you make feeds me. Every death, every prayer, all strands in my web. You cannot win. But Viridia raised her blade, the glow intensifying, its light cutting through the storm like dawn. Then we shall burn your web thread by thread. She surged forward, her sisters forming a wedge around her. Their hymn became a war cry, drowning out the demon's laughter. They would not break, they would not yield.
The Lord of Change loomed above them, wings unfurling with a crack like thunder. Warp lightning coursed across its feathers, each spark carrying whispers of impossible futures. Every beat of its wings threatened to snuff out the chamber's remaining sanctity. Every step a desecration of the Emperor's ground. The sisters advanced regardless. Bolters barked in coordinated bursts, each round blessed, each volley perfectly timed. Retributors laid down suppressive fire, forcing the daemon to shield itself with a storm of claws. Seraphim swooped past its face, pistols blazing, their trails of flame leaving seared gashes across its hide. Each maneuver was executed with such precision that it seemed rehearsed in eternity. Competence turned into art by faith. Yet still, the beast endured. It lashed out with a talon the size of a cathedral pillar, swatting two seraphim from the air. They struck the stone floor with bone-shattering force, but one still lived long enough to ignite her promethium tank, turning her death into a gout of cleansing fire that scorched the daemon's leg. Viridia seized the opening. She leapt, her boots slamming against broken stone, vaulting high with power armor groaning under the strain. Her sword struck the daemon's knee, cutting deep into warp flesh. It shrieked, the chamber quaking with the sound, as ichor rained like molten glass. But the daemon was cunning. With its other claw, it caught Viridia mid-strike, talons tightening around her torso. Armor buckled, bones cracked. The canoness screamed, but her sword hand did not release its grip. "Canoness," a Crenestian cried, charging forward with reckless abandon. She fired her bolter point-blank into the daemon's claw, shattering its grip. Viridia fell free, slamming onto the altar steps with a grunt of pain. The Crenestian was not so lucky, seized and ripped apart like parchment, her sacrifice buying only seconds. "Do not waste it," Viridia roared, dragging herself to her feet, armor hanging in shattered plates. She lifted her sword once more, the weapon's glow brighter than before, as if the Emperor himself stoked its fire. The daemon spread its wings, voice booming like a choir of lyres. "You cannot close the rift. This world will burn, and through it the galaxy will bleed." Viridia's voice cut through his lies. "Then we burn you first." She gave the signal. Dominion surged forward, flamers igniting, drenching the daemon's torso in a torrent of blessed fire.
Retributors emptied their heavy bolters until barrels glowed red. Seraphim descended from above, raining down bolt and flame in a crucifix of firepower. The chamber became a furnace, every shadow banished by righteous flame. And through it strode Viridia. She climbed the altar steps, every movement labored, blood pouring from her wounds, but her voice never faltered. For the Emperor, for the martyrs, for every soul this beast would devour. She reached the top as the daemon staggered back, its wings burning, its form unraveling under the onslaught. But it would not fall easily. With one last surge of power, the Lord of Change thrust its beak-like maw into the rift, drawing raw warp energy into itself. Its body swelled monstrously, a storm of corruption threatening to consume the entire cathedral. Viridia raised her sword high, its light now blinding. The sisters' hymn swelled to match it, and together they prepared to deliver the killing blow.
The rift howled like a living thing, its edges tearing wider with each second. The Lord of Change swelled with its power, its form splitting into grotesque duplications of itself, heads sprouting from shoulders, wings unfurling from hips, a body too chaotic for mortal comprehension. Warp light flickered through the chamber, painting the holy icons in blasphemous hues. But the sisters did not waver. Their hymn grew into a storm, rolling across the chamber like thunder. The retributors braced their heavy bolters for one last barrage, every shell glowing as if kissed by divine fire. The dominions, their flamers long exhausted, lit promethium tanks with their bare hands and hurled themselves into the demon's legs, detonating in gouts of holy flame. Seraphim descended in screaming arcs, bolt pistols hammering, each sister like a burning angel in the smoke. At the center stood Canoness Viridia. Her armor was shattered, blood running freely from a dozen wounds. Every breath rattled like broken glass. Yet her power sword blazed brighter than any star, runes of the Emperor's will crawling across its length. She knew this was the end, not just of the beast, but of herself. She turned once, her eyes sweeping her surviving daughters. "You have sung with me. You have bled with me. Now, sisters, let us die with him." The hymn roared into a final crescendo. Viridia charged. She climbed the altar, boots slipping on blood and ichor, the floor shaking beneath the demon's bulk. The Lord of Change lowered its many heads, mouths opening in a chorus of mockery and despair. Its talons reached for her, warp fire streaming from its claws. She did not falter. Every strike from her sisters carved her path. A Celestian threw herself against a demon's limb, anchoring it in place as Viridia darted past. A Seraphim, wing shredded, slammed her body into one of the demon's many eyes, blinding it as she was consumed. Each act of martyrdom was a stepping stone, each sacrifice a rung toward destiny. Viridia leapt. Her blade sank deep into the demon's chest, piercing not flesh but the very tether that bound it to reality. A scream unlike any sound erupted, the sound of lies unraveling, of futures unmade. The Lord of Change convulsed, its body collapsing inward as the rift shuddered violently. Warp light flared, threatening to consume everything. Viridia planted her feet upon the altar, driving the sword deeper, her voice cutting through the roar. "The Emperor is our shield! The Emperor is our fire! The Emperor is all!" With a final cry, she plunged herself and the demon into the heart of the rift. The chamber exploded in white fire. For an eternal heartbeat, silence. Then the rift shrank, collapsing in on itself with a scream of denial. The eyes blinked out, one by one, until nothing remained but charred stone and the lingering scent of incense and blood.
The sisters who survived staggered, their armor cracked, their faces blackened with soot. The chamber was still, the demon was gone, but so too was their canoness. Only her sword remained, embedded in the stone where the rift had been, glowing faintly, its flame eternal. The surviving sisters dropped to their knees. Their hymn became a whisper, a prayer of mourning and triumph. The cost had been terrible, but the Emperor's light endured.
Faith had been tested, and faith had endured. On that black stone altar, amid the ash of martyrs and the ruin of relics, the Adepta Sororitas proved once more that they are the Emperor's living wrath. They had faced not merely heretics, not merely a prophet twisted by corruption, but a greater demon itself. And though their canoness was gone, her sacrifice had sealed the wound, sparing an entire world from damnation. This was the essence of the Sisters of Battle, not gene-forged like the Space Marines, not armored in numbers like the Astra Militarum, but armored instead in faith. Where others falter, they burn brighter. Where others yield, they endure. For them, death is not defeat. Death is the Emperor's embrace, and martyrdom the purest victory. Those who survived would carry the memory of Viridia's final charge forever. Her sword, left standing in the altar stone, would become a relic, a beacon of faith for generations. Pilgrims would one day kneel before it, whispering prayers for strength. Sisters yet unborn would train in its shadow, swearing their oaths upon it before marching into battle. The galaxy would scarcely remember this battle in its endless tally of wars, but the Sororitas did not fight for remembrance. They fought because faith demanded it. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, every battle, every life, every death is a candle against the endless night. And as long as the Sisters of Battle endure, that flame will never be extinguished. The Emperor protects. More stories await.